I just want to look a little bit at money to try to understand. The first type of transaction that humans did was bartering, what the Arabs call muqayyada. And this is basically where you bring goods to the market and other people have goods and you want their goods and they want your goods. And you basically exchange. Well, that can be very cumbersome. And then it's difficult if you have a cow and all you want is a bushel of wheat. It's very difficult to make those type of exchanges. And so early forms of money, salt, which is where we get our word salary from in English, was used. One of the most common forms of money was actually shells, cowrie shells in particular, which are quite, they're relatively rare, and there's specific ones. In fact, they've sold for over $50,000 today. That's how rare some of them are. The Arab traders actually used cowrie shells in East Africa. And then also spice was used, particularly pepper. People liked pepper. But we have that term shell out. You know, you need to shell out some funds. And then wampum also was the beads that were used by the Native Americans, and it's famous that Minuet bought New York, the Manhattan Island, for a pile of beads. Believe it or not, tobacco was once legal tender in colonial Virginia. So these are all forms of money, but essentially the most important form of money that has emerged in our species, no pun intended, because it's called specie, is gold and silver. And in fact, in our tradition, Ibn Asakir says that Adam was the first one that minted gold and silver. And it is mentioned in Genesis that he was near a river that had gold in it when he came down to earth. Generally, the Muslims always understood money, what's called al-ain or naqdain, to be gold and silver. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But in the 10th century in China, because precious metals were rare, they actually started using paper. So and this is Christian era. So the first paper money is from China. Now, one of the interesting things, around the 16th century, you actually had the rise of international banking. So here in the Jew of Malta, because a lot of the Jewish moneylenders, they were permitted to loan money, according to the Bible, to non-Jews, to strangers, which are traditionally interpreted as enemies. So in the Jew of Malta by Christopher Marlowe, it was around 1590, he has the character Barabbas, who's the Jewish moneylender, say, in Florence, Venice, Antwerp, London, Seville, Frankfurt, Lubeck, Moscow, and where not, I have debts owing. And in most of these, great sums of money lying in el banco, in the bank. All of this I'll give to some religious house. He was basically forced to convert to Christianity. But the point is that Marlowe was pointing out that there was already, in the 16th century, an international banking system, which is very interesting. Now, the types of money that we have are fiduciary money. And I beg to differ with Hossam when he said that money doesn't have intrinsic value. Modern money does not. Traditional money was considered to have intrinsic value. The fiduciary money is based on having an intrinsic value. So it's a commodity-based money. And so, for instance, if you look at this note here, it says that this is redeemable in gold coin, $20 worth of gold. And so this was in the United States before the Federal Reserve. Then you got what's called fiat money. And this is basically money that is not backed. It's backed by two things: the productive capacity of the actual society that is printing it, and then the guarantee of the government to protect it. So those are the two things. And this is why American dollars are so valuable, because they become the reserve currency after Bretton Woods in 1944. So fiat is let it be. And it's actually in Genesis, in the Vulgate translation, fiat lux, let there be light. And so essentially, fiat money is created ex nihilo. And the only one that can really create ex nihilo is God. So Jefferson, because in the early period of the founding of this country, Jefferson actually warned about this because they had these continental notes, which were paper money. But he said that he considered banking to be more dangerous than standing armies. And spending money, what they do is spend money to be paid by posterity, because they create money. And so under the name of funding, they're actually swindling the futurity on a large scale. He also said that, that it will lead to bankruptcy and at the mercy of those self-created moneylenders and are prostrated by the floods of nominal money, in other words, money that has no real intrinsic worth, with which their avarice deluges us. So in 1913, there were several financial crises in the United States. So you had one in 1819, you had one in 1837, 1857, 1873, 1904, 1906, and then you had a huge one in 1907 where the Knickerbocker Trust Company in New York went bankrupt, and it created a huge crisis. Well, this very powerful banker, Paul Warburg, got his cronies together and basically bailed out the bank. So then you had basically this man, Senator Aldrich, who with the bankers, they went to a place called Jekyll Island, and it was very secretive. It was a very interesting event. And they created this system of the Federal Reserve to be the lender of last resort. In other words, they would basically bail out banks that got into trouble if they were big enough. If they weren't big enough, they let them fail. So this was signed in 1913 in December, and this became the Bank of America. And there's a very interesting about central banks. Recently, there were only about 4 countries that didn't have central banks: Libya, Syria, Iraq, and North Korea. I wonder if they have anything in common. So here's how they create money. Basically, you deposit $100,000. From that, and even this doesn't even mean anything anymore because they don't even have to have reserves until it gets to a certain amount. And it's between 5 and 10%. Some of the venture capital banks actually were leveraged much higher than this. But this is basically how it's done. And so this is the multiplier effect of banks. They create money out of nothing. And this is actually usury. Usury is not what a lot of people understand. Usury is to make money out of nothing. That's what it is. And so this is what they're doing. And so you have the central bank. They sell these treasury bonds, and then from that they print. So the government actually is using the central bank, which the Federal Reserve is. It's a hybrid of a government entity, but a private entity, which has 12 branches. The reason they're all over the country is because they didn't have the electronics when they started it. So it was all done by paper. So they had to have these 12 different banks. And they're actually private banks that work with the commercial banks. They give them money, and then the commercial banks, in turn, loan it out to the general public. And this is the money supply.